Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. This afternoon, the title of the presentation is Subject and Object, and this will be given to us by Desiree Van Sanen. So before we begin, a reading. This from the voice of the silence. The pupil must gain the childlike state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. The light from one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate like sun sparks, light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the ear, however eager, at the initial stage. Unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. Unless thou seest, thou canst not hear. To hear and see, this is the second stage. When the disciple sees and hears, when he smells and tastes, eyes closed, ears shut, with mouth and nostrils stopped, when the four senses blend and ready are to pass into the fifth, that of the inner touch, then into the stage, the fourth, he hath passed on. And in the fifth, O slayer of thy thoughts, all these again have to be killed beyond reanimation. Withhold thy mind from all external objects, all external sights. Withhold internal images, lest on thy soul light a dark shadow they would cast. Thou art now in Dharana, the sixth stage. When thou hast passed into the seventh, O happy one, thou shalt perceive no more the sacred three, for thou shalt have become that three thyself. Thyself and mind, like twins upon a line, the star which is thy goal burns overhead. The three that dwell in glory and in bliss ineffable, now in the world of Maya, have lost their names. They have become one star, the fire that burns but scorches not. That fire which is the upadi of the flame. And this, O yogi of success, is what men call dhyana, the right precursor of samadhi. And now thyself is lost in self, thyself unto thyself, merged in that self from which thou first didst radiate. Where is thy individuality, Lanu? Where the Lanu himself? It is the spark lost in the fire, the drop within the ocean, the ever-present ray become the all and the eternal radiance. And now, Lanu, thou art the doer and the witness, the radiator and the radiation, light in the sound and sound in the light.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to everyone in Internet land and in the lodge itself. Thank you, Monica. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say we give you our own Desiree Van Sanen.
Okay. Happy day. I hope everyone's day has been glorious and peaceful. I'm going to share my screen here. Give me a quick moment. Can everyone see okay?
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right, wonderful. All right. So we start with the Hermetic truism, which is in our almanac, the separation between spirit and matter, subject and object, is an integral part of the illusion or Maya of manifestation. And it's appropriate to start here because it sets the archetypal process of awakening and going back into uh, a synthesis or oneness. And at some point, we might want to discuss the significant difference between what is perpetual motion and that of action. That perhaps action involves more of a agency, but they are definitely connected, definitely related, perhaps even subject and object of their own. And this awakening is depicted and described in a beautiful way in her commentary on stanza 3 in the Book of John. HPB writes that the last vibration of the seventh eternity was foreordained by no God in particular, but occurred in virtue of the eternal and changeless law, which causes the great periods of activity and rest, called so graphically and at the same time so poetically the days and nights of Brahma, the ever to us invisible and immaterial substances present in eternity. Through its periodical shadow from its own plan into the lap of Maya. And so we know that motion is continual, it never stops. And to imagine pralaya, when one might even consider something so simple as a jack in the box. As the child cranks, that spring becomes more and more taut with each cycle. On the seventh, let's just imagine on the seventh turn, its tautness has become so intense that that energy has to be released. And some would say, well, that's like the earth coming, or excuse me, the universe awakening. It's awakening to its own self of expression. Um, so in this way, we can kind of regard that there's this internal motion going on, even at a time of pralaya. Let's see if I can move my HPB describes this process in one of the most beautiful writings of hers in the SD. She writes that just as milliards of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean above which one and the same moon is shining, so our evanescent personalities, the elusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego, twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. They last and appear as the thousands of sparks produced by the moonbeams, only so long as the queen of the night radiates her luster on the running waters of life, the period of a manvantara. And then they disappear, the beams, symbols of our eternal spiritual egos, alone surviving, re-merged in and being as they were before, one with the mother source. I think it's always um, a wonderful place to be where we can remember that we breathe because it breathes, that our heart beats because its heart beats, and we wake up and go to sleep because we are attached to that same overarching archetype. We are attached to it. There's no way we could breathe if it didn't. And every time we breathe, once a day maybe, think about that. How universal and oneness that keeps us all together, operating under the same umbrella, under the same archetype. She goes on to write in terms of subject object that space and time, which are often considered kind of two poles, are actually one. Space and time are nameless, for they are the incognizable that which can be sensed only through its seven rays, which are the seven creations, the seven worlds, the seven laws, etc., etc. And of course, those seven reach out in every direction and dimension. Countless they are. I want to talk just a little bit about how we perceive this idea of object and subject in a more conventional way before we go into more abstract views and concepts. Object is derived from the Latin objectus, meaning to throw or put before or against, from the term ob, meaning against. This can be referred to or quantified or thought of typically as a noun or the receiver of some kind of action, whereas the subject uses the same root but with the prefix sub, meaning under or supported by, such as a substratum, or that which initiates the throwing, the source of thought and or action in a particular direction. The subject is considered to have agency over or toward an object. In other words, it is the sender. Together they signify a relationship. And of course, wherever there is a relationship, we're talking about a conditioned state. And of course, there are countless conditioned states. Move on to the next one. Um, Interestingly, this concept of object subject are actually concepts surrounding the concepts surrounding the subject object relationship exist as a subtopic in many fields of study, from linguistics to religion. In jurisprudence, for instance, the subject refers to the individual or entity that engages with law, while the object is the law or legal system itself. Of course, this study is essential in understanding how cultural values shape our social structures. In psychology, the subject must have agency, or what is often termed personhood, a perceiver of some sort with the ability to, at some level, interpret the environment, to act upon the environment, and ultimately affect the objects in his physical objective world. In language, what is the subject in one sense can readily be altered into an object in another, based on the agency of the subject in relationship to the object. Take, for instance, the nursery rhyme, The Farmer in the Dell. I think most people have probably heard of this one, where the man takes the wife takes the child takes the maid the cow takes the dog takes the cat takes the rat, and the rat takes the cheese. Then the cheese stands alone. All of the subjects are acting upon the object, affecting it in some way. The cheese, due to its inability to act outside of itself, stands alone, unable to affect anything externally because it lacks that agency. In philosophy, the subject-object relationship is observed from many different angles. Phenomenology focuses on how subjects experience objects, emphasizing perception and consciousness. Realism asserts that objects exist independently of our perception, emphasizing an objective reality. Pragmatists view the subject-object relationship as dynamic, focusing on practical consequences and experiences, while the philosophy of idealism argues that reality is fundamentally mental, with objects existing only as perceptions in the mind. In quantum physics, especially in consideration of the double slit experiment that most of us are aware of, questions what role consciousness plays within the inner and outer worlds. Such studies have ushered in the question, is the apparent separateness between inner and outer worlds merely an illusion? In other words, is whether there exists synchronicity, that one exists not only in relation to the other, but in fact, each part of a dual reality depends on its polar opposite to even exist. Single unit expressed as two sides of the same coin, so to speak. The theosophical perspective on this, and this is just I'm sure there are many other um, statements that can be made with regards to subject object. I'm just going to give a few. The In a theosophical perspective, the subject refers to the observer or the self, while the object is the observed or the external world. That knowledge arises from the experience and perception of the interaction between subject and object. That the true understanding transcends duality between subject and object, and that spiritual evolution involves recognizing the unity of subject and object in the pursuit of spiritual wisdom. So, we're going to talk about relativity in terms of subject and object and how this can change just depending on what degree the consciousness is actually perceiving from. She writes in the Secret Doctrine in Volume 1 that it stands to reason that there must be an enormous difference in such terms as objectivity and subjectivity, materiality and spirituality, when the same terms are applied to different planes of being and perception. All this must be taken in its relative sense. She clarifies that given the septenary nature of man, what is subjective in one relation is objective in another. The expansion of consciousness includes a development of the subtle senses, which opens up to the inner many new worlds, people with their inhabitants, and interdependent, the one with the other. The subjective becomes the objective, with a still more subtle subjectivity beyond, which can become, again, objective as a still more spiritual consciousness is attained by the striver after freedom. And I looked at this word striver, or this term strider after freedom, and I asked myself, well, freedom from what? And the answer that I was able to conceive of was just simply the freedom from ignorance and our attachment that binds us to ignorance. One example of this is given in his article, Subjective and Objective, by William Quan Judge, where he illustrates the relationship between the two by comparing it to the states of relative consciousness as demonstrated in Plato's allegorical cave. Now, many already know this story, but I'll go ahead and give a brief overview here. In the allegory, excuse me, Plato describes people who have been forced from birth to spend their lives in a cave, chained by their necks and ankles. In front of them, there's a wall in which shadows are projected from a simple source of light, from actors who are creating the shadows from behind the wall, giving them voice and personality. The actors behind the wall are invisible to those chained observers. These shadows, their names, functions, and voices represent the narrow world of perception, limited to those who either cannot or will not seek beyond. In the end, according to Plato, it is the philosopher, who, extending his mind beyond these shadows, is freed from the cave and in turn comes to the realization that the shadows of the cave were a false reality. And now, outside of the cave and into the sunlight, he experiences a higher level of reality. In doing so, the philosopher also realizes that the other inmates of the cave do not have the slightest desire to leave their place. Plato strongly believed that light must be pursued, and this is done through reason, through the study of our natural world, through logic, through math and geometry. But the first step was the desire to know and to go beyond, to force the aperture of mind open. And of course, this cave and the exit out of this cave is has many different degrees. You can't just go from complete darkness to complete lightness. Everything is in stages. Very meticulous in that way. And Judge speaks of this. He says the scheme of theosophy recognizes a continuous gradation of powers, faculties, states, principles, call them what you will, from the highest or most spiritual to the lowest or most material. Again, these are in a relative sense. In this whole gamut of states or conditions, no chasm is found. There is nothing to bridge. Consciousness is the necessary substratum and presupposition of the most material, and consciousness is the noumena, or essential reality, of the most spiritual. But to know either, we cannot know or have a clear comprehension of that which we seek without knowing the knower. It was Ramana Maharshi who wrote that without knowing the knower, all the knowledge that one gathers cannot be valid. And it speaks to this truth in the voice where it states, excuse me, gotta move something around here, that the lamp burns bright when wick and oil are clean. To make them clean, a cleaner is required. The flame feels not the process of the cleaning. The branches of a tree are shaken by the wind. The trunk remains unmoved. And so it really speaks to this widening of the aperture of the mind and also a cleaning of that lens and what that entails through meditation, through silent listening, and through a pursuit of truth. That path may differ for many different people. But all the information that we gather, its truthfulness will be determined by the perceiver. So the perceiver really is that lens. In the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks to this, it brings kind of a differentiation, distinction between what is eternal and what is always under the tension of change. And when I speak of tension, it kind of does go back to that spring that is building up tension. Human beings are constantly changing, but there's almost a tension behind that change. When we get too far in one direction, we have a sort of almost a natural tendency to want to go back to the other side. It's kind of a pendulum movement. And we see that in society today, but it's always existed. And if we think about that tension, we should breathe in, and we reach a certain tension where we have to exhale. Kind of the same thing. So that's when I'm talking about the tension of change. It's kind of what I'm referring to. So um, one might think about the tension to exhale when we breathe. We don't just breathe into infinity. We reach a point and then we have to release. And then we reach a point after the exhalation when we reach a tension when we have to inhale. But they write that this Krishna is explaining that the Supreme Soul is imperishable, without beginning, and devoid of any material qualities. O son of Kunti, although situated within the body, it neither acts nor is tainted by material energy. Space holds everything within it, but being subtle does not get contaminated by what it holds. Similarly, though, though its consciousness pervades the body, the soul is not affected by the attributes of the body. Just as one sun illumines the entire solar system, so does the individual soul illumine the entire body with consciousness. Those who perceive with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and the process of release from material nature, attain the supreme destination. Krishna goes on to explain to Arjuna, this perishable body of Sanav is known as Kshetra. Those who are acquainted with the true nature of things call the soul, who knows it, the Kshetrajna. Know also that I am the knower in every mortal body, O son of Bharata. That knowledge which through the soul is the realization of both the known and the knower is alone esteemed by me as wisdom. What the Kshetra or body is, what it resembleth, what it produceth, and what it is its origin, and also who he is who, dwelling within, knoweth it, as well as what is his power. Learn all in brief from me. It has been manifoldly sung by the rishis with discrimination, and with arguments in the various Vedic hymns which treat of Brahma. And discourse regarding, this is all discourse regarding the understanding, distinguishes between that which is omnipresent and eternal and that which is under constant tension or change. We already talked about the tension of breath. Krishna goes on to explain and to give instruction. Know that the passions and the three qualities are sprung from nature. Nature or Prakriti is said to be that which operates in producing cause and effect in action. Individual spirit or Purusha is said to be the cause of experiencing pain and pleasure. For spirit, when invested with matter or Prakriti, experienceth the qualities which proceed from Prakriti. Its connection with these qualities is the cause of its rebirth in good and evil wounds. The spirit in the body is called Mashwara, the great Lord, the spectator, the admonisher, the sustainer, the enjoyer, and also Paramatma, the highest soul. In reference to the three qualities, and given this a little bit of thought, I thought to put these three, Sataraja and Tamas, into a triangle. And I'm going to call Tamas the object, Rajas the subject, and Sattva their synthesis. And in this sense, I thought of the object or Tamas as being like the motor of a car. It is idling. It always idles and never stops. It is like perpetual motion. It is inertia. But it needs something to compel it in a direction. For that, it needs the power of Raja. The power of Raja is like the driver of the car. It can move it in any direction within the parameters of law. But it must be moved. Perhaps the idea is to make that Raja and Tamas work together so that they both are synthesized into sattva, which would be the synthesis of the paramitas, because the paramitas themselves are one paramita, they're one thing, and synthesized into that one point, they rise above it. Why? Because, as Monica explained as she read through the voice of the silence, the journeyer becomes the path itself. All of those qualities in their most synthetic form merge with that journeyer. Excuse me. Take a little sip of water here pretty soon. So we're going to talk about conditioned versus non-conditioned or unconditioned, because there's so many different subtleties of consciousness. But HPB explains that consciousness itself implies limitations and qualifications. Something to be conscious of and someone to be conscious of it. But absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, the thing cognized, and the cognition itself. All three in itself, and all are one. She explains further in a footnote on the same page that non-being is absolute being in esoteric philosophy. In the tenets of the latter, even Adi Buddha, the first or primeval wisdom, is, while manifested, in one sense an illusion, Maya, since all gods, including Brahma, have to die at the end of the age of Brahma. It reaches that tension. The abstraction called Parabrahm alone, whether we call it Ansaf or Herbert Spencer's unknowable, being the one absolute reality, the one secondless existence, is Advaita, without a second. And all the rest is Maya, teaches the Advaita philosophy. And she speaks of this very simply in a simple statement that she makes in Atoms, Gods, and Monads in this SD when she writes that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that spirit is crystallized matter and matter is etherealized. I'm sorry, let me restate that. Spirit is etherealized matter and matter is concentrated spirit. And both are Maya. So what is beyond? Brahman is beyond mind and speech, beyond concentration and meditation, beyond the knower, the known, and the knowledge, beyond even the conception of the real and unreal. In short, it is beyond all relativity. This is interesting because oftentimes I think of this idea of the qualities, the paramitas, all these exalted qualities that we bring into our soul and really develop and try to understand. But even such a thing as forgiveness at some point becomes irrelative. Because where there is no forgiver and forgivee, there's no reason for forgiveness. It loses its meaning. But these are all such important stages for us to go through. We have to be able to look at them objectively, experience them objectively, learn of them objectively, so that one day they become subjective. So there has to be a force that connects subject to object. And we talk about Fohat a lot as being that special, and some people call entity. Um, but Fohat in our SD explains that spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute Parabrahm, which constitute the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective. But just as the opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter, are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized, so in the manifested universe, there is that which links spirit to matter, subject to object. This something at present unknown to Western speculation is called by the occultists Boha. It is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Bohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine, transmitted and made manifest through the Dian Chohans, the architects of the visible world. Thus, from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness, from cosmic substance, the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to self, or reflective consciousness. While Fohat and its various manifestations is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. Mhm. We could almost consider it action itself too. I think it's very closely associated with karma. When I think of a word, when I think of a simple sentence, you have your subject and your object. But the subject and the object fail to have any real meaning unless there is a verb that attaches them, and that verb is action. Fohat is the personified electric vital power, the transcendental binding unity of all cosmic energies, on the unseen as well as on the manifested planes, the action of which resembles, on an immense scale, that of a living force created by will in those phenomena where the seemingly subjective, acts on the seemingly objective and propels it into action. Fohat is not only the living symbol and container of that force, but is looked upon by the occultists as an entity, the forces he acts upon being cosmic, human, and terrestrial, and exercising their influence on all those planes respectively. By the action of the manifested wisdom, or Mahat, represented by these innumerable centers of spiritual energy in the cosmos, the reflection of the universal mind, which is cosmic ideation, and the intellectual force accompanying such ideation, becomes objectively the Fohat of the Buddhist esoteric philosopher. Fohat, running along the seven principles of Akasa, acts upon manifested substance, or the one element, as declared above, and by differentiating it into various centers of energy, sets in motion the law of cosmic evolution, which, in obedience to the ideation of the universal mind, brings into existence all of the various states of being in the manifested solar system and beyond. So I'm coming to the end of the presentation, but I want to end on a topic that's I feel like is very, very important. And this is the aspect of sound as subject object. Anahata. Anahata. This refers to the unstruck sound, representing the primordial sound that exists beyond the physical realm. It is often associated with the heart chakra and is considered a source or the sound produced without touching two parts. It is associated with the heart chakra, the product of the logoic heart. Ahata. This is the sound that is struck, which arises from physical sources such as musical instruments or spoken words. Ahata is the sound that we perceive in the material world, produced by the interaction of two parts. When I think about this idea of sound existing without it having to touch anything, well, it's a very, I don't know, inspiring idea to think of this because when I do think about it, I think about our ability to take a vibration and move it into a substance, let's say, of um, metal flakes, and those metal flakes turning into a geometric figure. One has to logically assume that that information is already in the vibration itself. When we think about that, when I think about that information being already kept in, it's already there. It doesn't have to touch anything. It's stored, akasha, on its many different levels. It's already in the sound itself. Then all it needs was an object to realize, to become manifest, to show itself. I think it's just a very beautiful thing to think about, especially in its relationship, the anahata, in its relationship to the logoic heart. I'm going to end on sticking with this idea of sound. I want to end with a closing remark from Raghavan Iyer, where he writes, "In the civilization of the future, children will learn the privilege of sounding words with a view toward communicating true meanings in the heart. That future will become realized as everyone learns to bridge mind and matter through sound." All right. I'm not exactly sure how long that all took, but
47.
what?
Well, 47 minutes, Desiree. Thank you ever so much for
Okay.
taking us on a tour of the universe, backwards and forwards, from universals to particulars, and beginning out with conventional psychological physics in regards to subject to object, and going all the way back up to the sound pertaining to the root. So, again, thank you for that going and coming in regards to this idea of subject and object on, again, its many different levels, planes, and perspectives. So, do we have any questions for Desiree? She provided a playground that we could go from the simplest to the most metaphysical. Yes, Mr. Moore.
This sounds kind of funny, but
I need some water.
is the aspirant, the object of the aspirant, the subject?
Hmm?
In other words, the object of knowledge is the knower.
Well, according to it's all one, first of all. So the knower, that which is known, observed, and thought itself. We learn that it's all one. And it's conditional. what I think is interesting is not that I think anything isn't interesting, but when she talks about the unconditioned as being unconscious, she doesn't mean unconscious. We just can't understand that degree of consciousness because it was so synthesized. And there's just no way for the conditioned perceiver to be able to understand something that is not conditioned. Just no way. We can talk around it, but we cannot actually understand it.
Right.
And so I'm not sure if I'm trying. Maybe I'm just
Well,
trying to.
you're thinking of the ultimate. What I was thinking of knowledge, which I don't really associate knowledge with the absolute. You know, that's beyond.
Yeah.
But in in the Voice of the Silence, HPB makes a distinction between the Tattvajnani and the Atmajnani. And I'm kind of thinking of the Tattvajnani, or he who knows the principles in man and nature, that knower. Now, when you think about what Ramana Maharshi had to say, you have to know the self. So it seems like the self is the object.
Okay, so to help with that question, Desiree, can we perhaps give some mild definition of the different types of selves that would place self in a position to be an object?
Well, the human and all life is sevenfold. Then we have to think in terms of body, soul, spirit, and all the degrees in between those, which are countless. Every time that we, let's say, our consciousness or that aperture is broadened, it's letting more light in, then that which was once subjective now becomes objective.
Mhm.
And I think I've even um, read that even in the devaconic states, that there are those who exist in those states
Mhm.
in an objective way,
Right.
right? So it's all relative to the consciousness or the light of. I'm sorry, I'm not a photographer, but I'm like really using these camera things. But there's just this aperture that we can move in such a way that it allows more light to come in. And once that light comes in, everything below it now becomes objective.
Mhm.
Okay. Everything above it is that is still brighter. I'm just using that as an analogy, is still subjective to it. So it's like it has this ability within law, within the parameters of law, to move, given its will, to move that aperture open, to move the aperture of the mind open.
Okay, and I think you were making reference to some of Judge's articles. I think even with the quotes that you mentioned, he talks about that in the article "Subjective and Objective,"
Mhm.
that continuous deepening. And I'm kind of equipped with Shoba's quote that she always makes, page 40. It says from the Secret Doctrine, HPB gave us, whatever plane our consciousness may be acting on or in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive, as your aperture you suggest opens, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities, and the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings. And so, in a sense, now to the point of Mr. Robert Moore, there should be a perceiver of the Atmajani as well as the Tatvajani. And so we are invited into a wonderful world. And a little later, I'll read, if we touch on this subject again, a quote from Subarao, exactly pertaining to these issues. But Desiree, anything else, or do we have any other questions? Or
Well, I just want to thank you, Desiree. I mean, that's a difficult issue, obviously, but just wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Well,
And
thank
your
you.
comments are very helpful.
Thank you.
okay, we have Miss Judy.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Desiree, for a very remarkable presentation. I was just thinking philosophically, there are two most famous examples of the subject and objective are in Bishop Berkeley's idealism, which is considered subjective idealism, and the ultimate. He says nothing exists outside the consciousness. And so we might say that the clothes in your closet don't exist if you're not perceiving them. I mean, to be is to be perceived. Esse is percipi. And so clearly, you know, there isn't anything really existing which is objective to you, or at least it'd be ridiculous to talk about it.
Mhm.
On the other hand, Plato is sort of the opposite of the forms are considered objective ideals, numbers, and ideals such as justice, truth, courage, sophrosine, the other forms. But how would theosophy resolve this? It occurred to me that if, as in Bishop Berkeley's philosophy, if we were to attain a consciousness of godlike knowing, then that which is all reality would become subjective to us. And that's the way he resolves it. There's this famous poem about a quadrangle in which someone is so puzzled and saying, well, if I'm not perceiving the tree, does it never exist? Is this astonishing? And then the limerick goes, sir, your astonishment's odd. I'm always around in the quad. And that's why the tree continues to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God. So Berkeley resolves that, and he considers that an argument for the existence of God in his own way. He was an Anglican bishop. And I was thinking if on Plato, if we could get on the level of the objective forms, above the divided line, even above, the idea of dikaisone and get to the noetic state, then these ideas would be subjective to us, which are objective to us in the cave. Would you agree with this resolution of these problems? Because, of course,
I
they're,
totally understand his resolution.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
What do you think about them?
Well, when I think about them, I mean, originally, there are all sorts of different philosophers who've written about them. It occurred to me that if we could get on the level of what these philosophers are talking about. Of course, Berkeley is talking about a personal God. He's an Anglican bishop. But if we could get on a higher level of consciousness, I mean, that which is objective to us, which we think we can't know, would become the knower, the knower, the known, and that which is to be known would become one.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, Plato
Mhm.
said subjective and objective would disappear, as that quotation from Hermes, I think, is talking about. So, in a sense, it's like in really understanding another person as a subject and not an object, you really understand what that person is saying and doing rather than thinking of them as, oh, just the person I talked to in the bank or my servant or my friend or my husband. You really understand that person as a subject and not an object.
Mhm.
And I think the problem of objectifying others in a very wrong way is a big problem. I just wondered if you agree with that. And anyway, that's my resolution of it as much as I can conceive of.
Well, unfortunately, we live in a world where objectification of others seems to be the ruling power right now. But I do think that all of it is necessary, and we, as human beings, have to reach a certain. I want to use this word tension again. Sorry, we have to reach a certain tension and move that perception from side to side. It's more of a pendulum effect. But I do think that ultimately it's not even to view each other as subject, because ultimately the subject and object idea in the mind is going to wear itself out. It's going to become not usable anymore. Because if we are truly um, if we're truly merged on the path, there's no longer a perceived duality or an experienced duality. When they truly do become one. And I like to think of it in terms of the actor becoming the action itself.
So it's no longer you and me, it's we.
Yeah, and maybe the we even takes on a more exalted um, perception.
And I think that's a key point, Desiree, because theosophy gives us also, to make things more complicated or to make them more simpler, the lie centers. And so there are those that mistake union for the absolute, but it's nothing but a lie center of homogeneity.
Right.
And so if we really begin to recognize that most of the things that we think of as objects, we've created, except for the elements. The elements, and then if we, as I think Schopenhauer suggested, anything that is objective to my consciousness is not my subjectivity. So whether objects, whether ideas, whether sounds, whether archetypal images, they're all objective to the inner subjectivity. And they're making a distinction between subjectivity versus the consciousness. Because even as HPB said in that wonderful quote, consciousness implies limitation, which means that it necessitates, as you suggest, that mutual dance of duality.
Mm-hmm.
And so, although the term absolute consciousness is utilized, we're definitely not talking about consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
and I think that's
so,
why she says unconsciousness
yeah,
because
yes,
we can't.
unconscious absolute. And so we are being given information, as you say, there's information inherent in the vibration, but that information that's inherent there is inherent within the divine thought, she says.
Mm-hmm.
And even that divine thought has to become an object to our true subjectivity.
Yeah,
And so, it opens up a wonderful door of true self examination.
it does.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think it gives us well, for me personally, I mean, it gives me so much more gratitude for conditioned being.
Hmm.
You shouldn't look at this as being something negative.
Right.
It's a beautiful process.
And,
Um,
it then we get to the point as you suggest, and then we'll hit Laura's comments and questions, where we can really see that the energy of subjectivity is the object as well as the subject.
mhm, mhm,
And it's only kind of reflecting off of itself in terms of knowing itself. And even that is not the absolute.
mhm.
So again, I mean, it's theosophy provides us truly with an ocean in which we can swim if we don't drown. Uh,
Everything
Laura,
in Manvantara is subject to change. It's subject to change.
yes,
It's conditional. It's conditional. It's
indeed. Thank you.
excuse me.
Yes, Laura.
Change is a good thing. We wouldn't want it to be anything else but change when we consider the subjective and objective, because it seems, and listening to the synthesizing the whole talk, that the subjective objective it becomes the journey of evolution.
Yes.
And the importance of even the three gunas as the engine of that evolution and moving from subjective to objective is interesting. And I never considered the farmer in the dell about evolution before. And so I really appreciate that. But even the poor vegetable kingdom that gets left out of that poem becomes aware of the sun and moves the sun becomes objective to the plant, and the plant moves towards that object and its evolution as well. But it's interesting that idea of subjective objective as a process of evolution.
The duality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In both.
And perhaps again that article that you cited by Judge, instead of describing things as molecular consciousness and plant consciousness, similar to the monad, why not say the consciousness expressing itself through a molecular form,
Mm-hmm.
or the consciousness that expresses itself through the, as he puts it, astral plant sensitivity. And then when we get to the point where consciousness is no longer expressing itself through an external object and it can turn into itself,
Right.
then we begin the inner journey. There's an invisible hand in San Diego. An invisible podium presence. Oh, Mr. Colbert.
Or the camera's too far low. Let me see if I can stand back. That's not working.
It's hiding your Phyllis Diller hair.
Yeah, yeah. I tried to get the dye out. Okay. Well, I have a question or a comment, I guess. This thing about objectification, and there's something in that in the social justice movement, you could say, where there is the objectification and therefore the exploitation of defenseless people and defenseless nature. And it occurred to me, I just watched a movie that I think is going to get more popular. It was like a pre-screening release or something. It's called The Man Who Saves the World. And it was about this guy who went to India, and he was at this pilgrimage thing, and these elders told him that he had to do something. And it had to do with being invited to go to visit with the elders of the native peoples of the Amazon River watershed, having to do with the destruction of the trees and so forth. And Monica was there too, so she can help me get this thing together. So, but anyway, the thing was is that he was asked to unite all these peoples, these seemingly disparate nations and tribes and so forth. And they felt that by first uniting all the tribes in the area, that was going to help with the kind of reverse the polarity, so to speak, with the exploitation that was going on with the Amazon rainforest. And then they figured out, wait a minute, let's get the North American tribes to do the same thing. And then they did that. And then they had a meet in Chiapas, Mexico. There's this incredible meeting and so forth. The idea was that the indigenous peoples, if they could get them all together in solidarity, and then that would in turn have its effect on the so-called Western culture, European and American, so-called civilization, and that they would get on board too. And that this kind of solidarity thing would somehow change the exploitation that was going on. And it occurred to me that that's what Gandhi did in India. First, he was very much into theosophy, actually, but then he kind of let that go underground, and he kind of presented himself as a Hindu at that point. And then, but he started developing sincere friendships with Islamic people, Christians, Zoroastrian, you name it, everybody. And then he started uniting the so-called classes, the Brahmins, the upper classes, the lower classes, financially and economically, and the so-called spiritual divisions and all that with the untouchables and so forth. And that created a milieu and an environment where the British no longer had a hold on the whole situation. Somehow that was like they were forced out, they were displaced by all this solidarity somehow. And that was the revolution. So I'm thinking about that there must be something about this subjective, objective transcendence, and through sound that was brought out in the talk, that creates an environment in which objectification is less possible. Anyway, hopefully you're not too confused by all that.
Well, you mean objectification as in
Exploitation.
Exploitation. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So obviously I was going out on a limb there.
It's a wonderful limb. I'm giving Desiree the floor, and then I'll spill some water on the floor.
Oh, please spill. Go ahead and spill.
Go ahead and spill. Well, I'm thinking of HPB and Hegel in The Secret Doctrine and the references that she makes, and the philosophy that Hegel puts forth. And he spoke about that phase of evolutionary objectification, where one looks at oneself and one looks at the other and negatively objectifies, which is not an evolutionary progression, because they were supposed to really recognize that the mind in themselves and the mind in the being are really what gives meaning to the interaction, and that mental continuum is kind of one. And with the realization of that, there is no objectification of another, but rather a union with the other in terms of now moving to the next progressive stage that has to do with the evolution of mind as opposed to mind and matter or subject and object. So, within the very spiritual light and fire within our being, if you wanted to speak in Hindu terms, that opens up the chakras, there is a stage of moving from one to the other that takes us from rational mind and subjective objective to perhaps that quote relating to the heart.
Yeah.
Where one recognizes that the spiritual presence of consciousness within one's being is the same within all being. And then another phase of evolutionary exchange and working together in solidarity, as you suggest, can come about, which then broadens that circle that Desiree spoke about in terms of the circumference. And when the circumference broadens, we have to recognize more energy is let in, which now means that the forms that were there have to be broken down and new ones built up. And that provides a tangible, concrete basis when the circumference of the circle expands. Pi will always be pi. But the energy within that circumference of the circle has more ability to create more forms, diversity, deeper understanding, greater experiences. So, in a nutshell, that story that you're presenting is very much in line with Hegel's, not to mention Spinoza and Leibniz, those three that HPB points out. And I think Judy will probably say some more about that. Judy, your hand is up. You're muted.
To say anything about Hegel, which is much more what I used to do, but it occurred to me about what Jonathan said. I recently saw an old movie, which many of you may not know about, or it's called Sister Kitty, and it's played by Rosalind Russell. He usually plays a sexy role, but in this case, she plays an Australian bush nurse who found out a way to help poor children in the bush who had polio, who had no doctor anywhere near them. And there were these poor paralyzed children. And she said, well, let's warm up their limbs by putting on a warm compress, because she said this one muscle is paralyzed and the other's in spasm. And she was totally against braces or putting children in casts to immobilize them, which the doctors wanted to do. So she winds up taking on the whole medical system in Australia and later in England, even the Royal Society. And everyone is saying, you're only a nurse, you're just a quack, your business is serve the doctors. But finally, she's invited by the University of Minnesota and the Mayo Clinic, and they now named the Kinney system after her, gave her 3 honorary doctorates, American universities, although she was only a nurse by education. But her system enabled thousands of children to walk who were otherwise crippled. And in the end, there are thousands of children who are cheering her. And it just says, the people, there's a line in it where one of the actors says, the people are stronger than the system, which is what we have to fight for now in the United States and everywhere in the world. We, the people, are the subject. We are not the object of the rulers. And I remember it took me 3 questions once at Cal Poly. I said, who's sovereign in the United States? And someone said, oh, the president. I said, no. Well, the Congress? No. The Supreme Court? No. I said, the people. If you read the Constitution, we, the people. We are not the object of rulers, we're the subject. So I thought it was so inspiring, and I showed it to a friend of mine last week, how this woman, who was only a nurse, took on the medical establishment and she won. I mean, they now call the system for the treatment of poliomyelitis, which has largely been eradicated, um, after her because of her amazing treatment. And of course, then eventually they developed the Salk vaccine. But I mean, a great deal is owed to the courage of this person and the people who eventually were helped by her. Because thousands came forward and said, I can walk because of her. And other people treated by these famous doctors couldn't walk. They were crippled. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's an amazing movie. If you ever want to see it, it's just called Sister Kenny. And that's what an Australian military nurse is called. She wasn't a nun.
Well, thank you. Desiree, any observations?
No.
Okay, well, thank you, Judy.
I
Shilpa,
humbly,
your
that
hand.
was, though I know I'm just like enjoyed listening to you,
Oh.
Judy, talking about that. I just got involved in the stories.
In story. Yeah. Okay. Well, Shilpa had her hand up for a hot minute. Are you still on fire, Shilpa?
It's just I just wanted to summarize it with one statement, Desiree. You know, we talk metaphysics. We talk a lot of metaphysics, but without the ethics, it's nothing. That's what all this proves. You know, that was beautiful. What everybody contributed to make this. What you said, you know, living now, a living power, and you ended it beautifully, right? With that poetic power.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate everyone
Thank you.
help today.
Thank you much.
Yeah, can you mention next week, which happens to be non-possession next week?
All righty. All welcome.
Thank you, Gene, so much. Thank you, Desiree, so
Thank you,
much.
Desiree.
Desiree, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
So
they're right.
good.
Really
Namaste.
Okay.
wonderful meeting. Thank you for your comments. Okay, thank you all. Good night.
Good seeing you, Judy.
Okay.